December 1942. The salt-crusted bridge of U-552 pitched through black North Atlantic swells as Captain Lieutenant Eric Top raised his Zeiss binoculars toward the eastern horizon. 400 nautical miles southwest of Iceland, the cold bit through his leather coat with the particular viciousness of a winter dawn at sea. Behind him, the conning tower watch stamped their feet against the deck plates, breath clouding in the half-light. Top had been at sea for 23 days, and his tally stood at 4 Allied merchantmen sent to the bottom, a respectable patrol by any measure, but unremarkable for a commander who had already sunk over 30 vessels in his career. What caught his attention now was not another potential kill, but rather the silhouette crawling across the gray water at barely 11 knots, trailing a plume of coal smoke that stained the winter sky. Through the magnification, he could make out the ungainly lines of what British sailors called a Liberty ship, one of the new American-built transports that had begun appearing in convoys with increasing frequency over the past 6 months. Top lowered his glasses and permitted himself a thin smile. The vessel looked exactly as intelligence reports had described, a flat-sided, slab-hulled monstrosity with all the grace of a floating warehouse. The hull plating appeared crudely welded rather than riveted, the craftsmanship visibly inferior even at this distance. His first officer, Oberleutnant Klaus Bargston, had joined him on the bridge and was studying the same target through his own optics. "Another of the American coffins, Hercule," Bargston remarked, using the submariners' shorthand for captain. "They weld them together in pieces like children's toys. The hull stress alone should crack them in half during an Atlantic storm." Top grunted in agreement. Kriegsmarine intelligence had circulated photographs and technical assessments of these vessels, emphasizing their hasty construction and structural vulnerabilities. The EC-2 cargo vessel design represented everything that proper naval architecture was not: standardized rather than purpose-built, mass-produced rather than crafted, American rather than European. Yet Top felt a flicker of something he could not quite name as he watched the Liberty ship lumber eastward through the swells, her holds presumably packed with grain, or steel, or the 1,000 other commodities Britain needed to continue the war. It was not quite concern, not yet, but rather the uneasy recognition that something in the calculus of the Atlantic War had begun to shift. The strategic logic governing German naval operations in December 1942 appeared irrefutable to the commanders who gathered in Berlin's Terpitzufer, the imposing headquarters of the Oberkommando der Marine. Gross-Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat fleet and architect of the Wolf-Pack Doctrine, had reduced the entire Atlantic campaign to a mathematical equation that he presented with the confidence of a man who had calculated his way to victory. The formula was brutally simple. Britain required approximately 1 million gross register tons of merchant shipping per month to sustain her population and war effort. If German submarines could sink merchantmen faster than British and American shipyards could replace them, the island nation would be strangled into submission within 18 months, perhaps less. By mid-1942, this calculation appeared to be working. U-boats operating in coordinated groups, the feared riddle tactic, had sent 6,266,215 gross tons of Allied shipping to the Atlantic floor during the year, an average of over 500,000 tons per month. The curve was trending upward. British food reserves had fallen to 8 weeks. The tonnage war was being won. German confidence in this strategy rested on industrial assumptions that seemed beyond dispute. Building a proper ocean-going merchant vessel was a labor-intensive process requiring 12 to 18 months from keel-laying to launch. Hulls were riveted together by skilled craftsmen, each plate carefully fitted and secured with thousands of individual fasteners. Propulsion systems, navigation equipment, and structural components were custom fabricated for each vessel. Even in the most efficient British yards, construction times rarely dropped below 9 months. The United States, despite its vaunted industrial capacity, operated shipyards constrained by these same fundamental limitations of naval construction. Or so German intelligence assured Donitz. What Berlin's analysts failed to comprehend, what their entire framework of naval warfare rendered invisible, was that American engineers were not attempting to build ships faster. They were redesigning the very concept of shipbuilding itself, transforming it from a craft into an industrial process, as mechanized and scalable as automobile manufacturing. In September 1941, 18 months before Top observed that Liberty's ship through his binoculars, a man named Henry J. Kaiser had stood in a California shipyard and made a promise that German naval intelligence would later dismiss as propaganda. Kaiser, who had never built a ship in his life but had pioneered mass production techniques in constructing the Hoover Dam, announced that his yards would produce merchant vessels in weeks rather than months. The design he adopted, the EC-2, or Liberty ship, embodied principles that violated every tradition of proper shipbuilding. The hull would be welded rather than riveted, eliminating hundreds of thousands of man-hours. Structural components would be prefabricated in inland factories and transported to the yards for assembly. Every vessel would be identical, allowing workers to specialize in repetitive tasks rather than custom fabrication. Engines, winches, navigation systems, all standardized, all interchangeable, all ordered in bulk from suppliers who could tool up for mass production. The Germans, receiving their first intelligence reports on Liberty's ship construction in early 1942, noted the welded hulls with particular satisfaction. Welding was faster than riveting, yes, but it created stress points that made vessels vulnerable to structural failure in cold water. Several Liberty ships had indeed cracked their hulls during North Atlantic crossings, appearing to confirm German skepticism. What the Kriegsmarine analysts missed was that American engineers were already addressing these welding failures, redesigning stress points and modifying techniques. More critically, they missed the implications of production velocity that was accelerating beyond anything in naval history. By January 1943, U-boat captains returning from Atlantic patrols began filing reports that their intelligence officers initially flagged as exaggeration or misidentification. The number of Liberty ships appearing in convoys had increased dramatically, not by factors suggesting incremental production increases, but by orders of magnitude that implied something fundamentally impossible. Corvettenkapitän Otto Kretschmer, the most successful U-boat commander of the war before his capture in 1941, had sunk 44 Allied merchantmen totaling 266,629 tons. If every U-boat captain achieved similar results, and if Britain and America could only replace losses at traditional shipbuilding rates, the mathematics of starvation remained valid. But the Liberty ships kept coming. When Top returned to Lorient after his December patrol, he reported encountering 6 Liberty ships in a single convoy, all of them constructed within the previous 4 months according to the hull numbers visible through his periscope scope. His debriefing officer noted the observation but attached no particular significance. 6 vessels in 4 months from American yards was unremarkable, well within expected production capacity. The intelligence failure was comprehensive. German analysts knew that 18 American shipyards were building Liberty ships. They knew each yard had multiple ways. They knew the design was standardized. What they could not conceive, what their entire framework of industrial warfare rendered unimaginable, was that Kaiser's Richmond Yard No. 2 had launched the SS Robert E. Peary on November 12, 1942, just 4 days and 15 hours after laying her keel. 4 days. The vessel was 441 feet long, displaced 14,245 tons fully loaded, and was completed with engines, navigation systems, and armament installed. German intelligence officers who later encountered this figure during interrogations dismissed it as a recording error, perhaps 4 weeks and 15 days, miscopied by an American clerk. Even 4 weeks would have been extraordinary. 4 days was physically impossible. Except that it had happened, documented by photographs showing the Peary's keel-laying ceremony on Sunday morning and her launch ceremony the following Thursday afternoon, an American flag breaking from her staff as she slid into San Francisco Bay while her welding torches were still cooling. The Peary was a stunt, a demonstration of maximum possible velocity using 3 shifts working around the clock. But even the routine production pace defied comprehension. By March 1943, American yards were averaging 42 days from keel to launch per Liberty ship. The Richmond yards alone were completing a vessel every 72 hours. Bethlehem, Fairfield, and Baltimore launched a Liberty ship every 38 hours during their peak production period. The numbers accumulated into a flood that transformed the Atlantic equation from mathematics to mockery. In 1942, German U-boats sank 1,570 Allied merchant vessels. In 1943, American shipyards launched 2,751 Liberty ships alone, not counting other vessel types. Each Liberty ship could carry 10,000 tons of cargo, ammunition, food, steel, aircraft, trucks, the entire material weight of industrial war. For every merchantman top sent to the bottom, American yards were launching 2 replacements before his submarine could reload its torpedoes. May 1943. The North Atlantic had become a graveyard, but not in the way Donitz had calculated. In the first 3 weeks of the month, 43 U-boats failed to return from patrol, an unsustainable loss rate that forced Donitz to withdraw his wolf packs from the North Atlantic convoy routes for the first time since 1940. The withdrawal was presented as a temporary tactical adjustment, but the commanders who survived knew better. They had been hunted through increasingly effective Allied air cover, pursued by escort carriers and long-range patrol aircraft that should not have existed in such numbers. They had fired torpedoes at convoys protected by destroyer escorts that American yards were building faster than submarines could sink them. And everywhere, always, there were the Liberty ships, gray hulls stretching to the horizon in formations that suggested industrial capacity beyond calculation, beyond reason, beyond anything in German experience. Captain Zur C. Gunter Hessler, Donitz's son-in-law and chief of U-boat operations analysis, assembled the data with the meticulous horror of a man watching his calculations devour themselves. Allied merchant tonnage afloat had not decreased during 1942 despite catastrophic losses. It had increased. American production had not merely replaced losses, it had exceeded them by margins that rendered the entire tonnage war strategically void. At current production rates, the United States alone could replace the entire British merchant fleet every 18 months. The welded coffins that German commanders had mocked were carrying 17 million tons of cargo to Britain in 1943, and production was still accelerating. Hessler's report to Donitz on May 24, 1943, marked the effective end of the First Battle of the Atlantic. The enemy builds ships faster than we can sink them. The equation cannot be solved. After the war, captured German naval officers faced the Liberty ship production statistics during their interrogations with reactions that Allied intelligence officers found remarkably consistent. First came flat denial: the figures were propaganda, impossible, mathematically absurd. Then came demands to see the documentation, the photographs, the yard records. Then silence as they absorbed the implications of what American industry had achieved while their U-boats prowled the Atlantic. Gross Admiral Donitz himself, testifying at Nuremberg, addressed the Liberty ships with the bitter precision of a strategist confronting his own obsolescence. We calculated our way to victory based on construction times that were already history. The Americans built a different kind of ship using methods we did not comprehend until too late. They industrialized the ocean. By war's end, American yards had produced 2,710 Liberty ships at a total cost of $13 billion, an average of less than $2 million per vessel. 200 of them were sunk by enemy action. The remaining 2,500 carried the material weight of Allied victory across every ocean on Earth, proving that wars are won not by elegant engineering or tactical brilliance, but by the brutal arithmetic of production. The crude, welded coffins that Eric Topp had mocked through his binoculars became the instrument that drowned the wolf pack, one prefabricated section at a time, assembled faster than any military tradition could adapt to or any strategic calculation could overcome.